All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the State Water Resources Control Board Division of Drinking Waters training on the recently issued PFAS monitoring orders. We're super happy you were able to join us this morning, and we're excited to bring you a panel of experts to answer all of your questions on the special monitoring orders that were just issued. I'm Cassie Chahan. I'm talking to you live today from the DDW Fresno office. I'm going to be moderating today's training session. We are using Skype for Business, so hopefully things run smoothly. If you're not familiar with that, you will want to use the full audio if you want to type in questions and answers during the presentation today. Today we have gathered an esteemed panel of DDW experts who will provide you with some background information on PFAS, details on why you received the PFAS monitoring order, and important details on sample collection as well as answering all of your questions. Before we get started, I do have a few instructions for all of you who are attending today. We do have a very large audience. So I'm asking that all attendees mute their phones and don't unmute them during the presentation. It's especially important that we try to limit the amount of distractions we have. If you do have questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A panel. That should be found right at the bottom. Let's see, the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. There's a Q&A tab, and you can type in your questions there. We are recording today's session for those who want to review it in the future, and a copy of the handouts was provided prior to the presentation today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, we have some DDW experts for today's training. First, you're going to hear from the DDW Northern California Branch Chief, Mr. Dan Newton. Followed by Dan, you will hear from Mr. Kurt Souza, the Southern California Branch Chief. And last, you will be hearing from Ms. Betsy Lichty, the Quality Assurance Section Chief. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dan to get us started.
Thank you, Betsy. This is Dan Newton, and I want to thank you all for joining us this morning on this PFAS presentation. Basically, as Cassie outlined, I will start with a quick recap of our March 6th board meeting, discussing our phased investigation approach, some of the criteria behind it, and how we selected the source wells to send orders to. Then I'll hand it off to Kurt, who will dive into the actual orders themselves and the implementation of those orders, followed by Betsy, who will take a dive into the sampling procedures and concerns that we have and resources that are available to us. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. I wanted to note that trying to advance the slide here real quick. There we go. I want to note that this is basically not only a statewide effort, but a nationwide effort, but more close to home. Here at Cal EPA, we've got all the different BDOs hopping on board with this effort. We have the Air Board, DPR, DTSC is doing quite a bit on this front. OEHA is working with us on toxicity assessment and setting levels. And here at the Water Board, we have both the Division of Water Quality and the Division of Drinking Water working on this together. This is a joint project, and you'll see that in the approach that we have, this phased investigation approach. It's both a DWQ and DDW effort. So to give some background on actions to date, and this is recapping our March 6th board meeting. In 2013 and 2015, through that time frame, US EPA worked on their unregulated contaminant monitoring rule number 3. We call that UCMR 3. They went out and selectively sampled larger systems for PFAS. Following that, in 2016, they issued a health advisory of 70 parts per trillion for combined PFOA and PFAS. Following that, our Division of Drinking Water, DDW, in 2016, worked with those results and addressed some of those detects, those PFAS detects that were out in the field. Water agencies that did have a detect stepped up and took wells offline, blended or treated. Following that, in 2018, the Division of Drinking Water issued notification level and response level for PFAS and PFOA. Important note, I'm referring to both PFAS, PFOA, and some of their sister analytes as PFAS. That's just a general term I'll be using through this presentation. And those that notification level was 13 and 14 parts per trillion for PFAS and PFOA, and the response level, of course, was 70 parts per trillion. Through the summer of 2018, we worked with lab capacity, knowing that this was becoming a concern and politically becoming a hot topic. We wanted to be sure that we had the proper lab capacity before moving forward. And we believe we have that now. It's a bit of a stretch, but that's how we established our targeting, was to ensure that we had proper lab capacity to handle what we target with these the source wells that we pick up as potential candidates for sampling. Just recently, last thing here is in 2019, US EPA just in February issued their action plan, and that was a lengthy document that basically establishes a path forward for US EPA. Shortly after that, in March 6th, Division of Drinking Water and the Division of Water Quality approached the State Water Board and shared our phased investigation approach. This investigation approach has 3 phases, a total of 3 phases. However, at the board meeting, it was roughly a 4-hour board meeting, we had quite the panel give presentation on the background of PFAS, what's been done to date with other federal and other state organizations, and we had some NGOs share their concerns with the drinking water. And so I'm going to go over those 3 phases that we shared with the board on March 6th. Phase 1, which is what we're in right now, basically focused on 3 criteria. I've got them bold here with the 3 bullets. Those areas of focus, or the 3 criteria that I'm mentioning, are places that we knew used or stored or contained PFAS materials, such as airports that were licensed to train with the aqueous film forming foam, AFFF, landfills that store PFAS containing materials. And then what we did is we took the UCMR3 effort that I mentioned earlier from the federal effort, and those that were DTECs or non-DTECs were expanding upon that. And so these are the focuses for the Division of Water Quality to sample those particular locations. What we did in the Division of Drinking Water is we used those as a center of radius. And on this next slide, you'll see that we basically we're sampling nearby drinking water wells. Basically, systems or source wells that are within airports, a 2-mile radius of airports, we're capturing in this phase 1 effort. A 1-mile radius was drawn around landfills, and we located source wells. And then, of course, the UCMR3 effort, a 1-mile radius that picked up both large and small systems within DTECs of the UCMR3 effort back in 2013 through 2015. As a last filter, our district engineers out in the district offices looked at the source wells that we captured within those radiuses and applied a final review, taking into account gradient, just being sure that it fit the ground appropriately before sending out. Now that final review resulted in the addition and deletion of source wells as they move forward and issue those orders, or will be issuing the orders. I want to touch real quickly on phase 2 and 3, and so on this slide we have phase 2, and I call it draft, in that although we presented to the board, we are going to take into account the results we get back in phase 1 and make fine-tune adjustments. But in general, phase 2, which will start probably this summer, will focus on sites such as those that manufactured PFAS. Basically, we're verifying if there was any of that in California. The second bullet, refineries, bulk terminals, and airport fire training areas that we missed in the first phase, or fine-tuning in the second phase. And then lastly, urban wildfire areas. So we're going to sample nearby drinking water wells, and the criteria, the radiuses that we'll use on that have not been determined yet. The same with phase 3. This goes a little bit more into the detail. DWQ will be focusing on secondary manufacturing sites where PFAS materials were used or discharged into wastewater. And then we'll be focusing on the surface water side with wastewater treatment and pretreatment plants. That phase 3 effort will start probably late summer. And again, I call these draft as we fine tune and move forward. So just a recap real quick on the timelines of phase 2 and 3. Looks like summer or fall we'll be going out with more information and criteria on that and selecting our source wells. And then each source well, as Kurt will get into more detail, we're looking to sample that quarterly for a year. So each phase, in essence, targets a source well, and that source well will be focused on for the next year. Back to phase 1. This is the phase that we're currently working on. Orders have been going out. We're nearly complete. DDW, I'd say, is about 90% complete sending those orders out. So if you have not received an order yet, you will be very soon. But I believe most of you have already received these orders. We will be sharing the final list once the DEs finish their review on the web. Again, we're about 95% there, and I'll share some statistics with you, some statistics and tables of the source well list to date. Again, it's draft. And so phase 1, it looks like we're going to request sampling from 660 wells. And so this is a breakdown. It's a lot to digest here, but I'll start on the left. Basically, these are the number of wells under the criteria that I mentioned under phase 1. You'll notice the orange and the green, the left two columns, the 99 and 161. Those are detects that or wells that we're going to pick up using the UCMR3 criteria. Those are wells nearby the federal effort that identified a detect. The next one is landfills. Basically, we used a 1 mile radius, and we picked up 138 wells that are located within a 1 mile radius of landfills that we know use PFAS or store PFAS materials. Near that, the gray is the airports, 2 miles, 215 wells. And then the next 4 columns are basically combinations thereof. On the far right, you'll notice that we have 2 wells that are within an airport, a landfill, and the UCMR3 detect. And so for a grand total of 660 wells. Diving into the details a little more, and I had to break the table up so that it was viewable. But in essence, we have 660 wells that are contained within 209 water systems that will be receiving or have received the orders. And that covers 36 counties throughout the state of California. The table to the right breaks the well count down by county. And of course, you'll see Los Angeles at 141, Orange County, Riverside. There are some of the counties that have a larger volume of wells within our focus. Again, that's the grand total of 660. This number will change, not much, but will change as we send our final orders out and the district engineers fine-tune. And at that point, we are, as I mentioned, sending out the orders that contain a cover letter and an order. And I will hand it over to Kurt Souza, who will go into the details on how these orders will be implemented. Kurt?
Thank you, Dan. This is Kurt Souza. I'm the Southern California Branch Chief. I'm going to go over pretty much what you received or what you will receive if you are getting one of these orders. We sent a cover letter with some basic information and then the order. And the order requires source monitoring. I think that's really important because I'm going to get into some other monitoring that's optional, but this requires source monitoring. So this is prior to any treatment, and it's quarterly for 1 year, and it's only sources that are specifically listed in the order. So most systems will have, multiple groundwater sources, but only 1 or 2 would be in the order. Some have more, but they're only the sources that are deemed vulnerable. So it's not every source. So please check that order carefully. There's a table in there that specifically lists the wells. If a source is out of service for mechanical or whatever, please contact your local district office to develop an alternative schedule. Because we want it eventually sampled, and we understand that if you're doing something to it, you're doing something to it. So please just call the district office to notify them. Also, if you feel that the well is in the wrong place, and I know we've already got some calls, from orders that went out and said, wait a minute, that well's, way over there. We have some locational mistakes. We have lat longs on a lot of your sources, but some of them aren't, particularly correct. Please call the local district office. We can make adjustments. The first quarter sample needs to be done by June 30th. So we're looking for a sample in April, May, or June. And basically the second quarter 2019 to be our first quarter sampled. And for the LPAs, for the small systems and our county regulated LPAs, a notification letter was sent to the county health officer and the county environmental health director notifying them of our plan. That was sent out a few weeks ago. And the Division of Drinking Water's field offices issued all the orders. So none of the orders were issued by the counties. The small water systems regulated by the counties, the orders were issued by our field offices. So we go to the next slide. So some of the sampling details in the order, and this is kind of getting into what you have to do. And this is for what would happen for resampling or if you got a detect. So if your initial sample, so if a sample is detected above a notification level or it's a positive result, you have an option to resample, and it's listed in the order. And the water system has the option to collect a confirmation sample within 30 days. Okay? Now, if you're over the notification limit, you have a requirement to notify your local governing body. We'll go into that. But in that law, it basically says it is a confirmed detection. So a confirmed detection is not necessarily stated a definition in that portion of the law. So in the order, we gave you the option to confirm your detect, and that's what this is. You have the option to confirm a detect within 30 days. If you don't take that option, if you got a number, if you got 25 for PFAS and you don't want to resample, that's fine. It's considered a notification level exceedance, and you have to follow the law on the notification. Or you can take a confirmation sample. If you take a confirmation sample, all the samples collected within that quarter will be averaged to determine compliance with the notification level. It's the same thing we do with VOCs and SOCs. And then the last bullet here is if you get a positive result for a source and you do a confirmation sample and it is less than the laboratory's method reporting limit, so it's basically non-detect, you have the option of taking a second confirmation sample. If you do a second confirmation sample and it is also non-detect, the two non-detect samples following the positive result will be discarded. And we'll mark it in our database as a false positive, just like we do with other VOCs and SOCs. So this is kind of the same procedure that you've done for years with VOCs and SOCs. If you get a positive, you go back and take a resample, it's non-detect, you go back and take another one, it's also non-detect. The first positive will be disregarded. So that's an option also for sampling. So the next slide Are we stuck? Okay. So this slide talks about the treated water sampling. Now, I got to make this perfectly clear. Treated water sampling cannot be substituted for source water monitoring in the order. The order requires source water monitoring because we want to know what's in the source. We want to know if the groundwater has PFAS in it. That's the main purpose of this. Now, in the notification level section of our statute, you have to notify for a confirmed detect that is delivered to the public. Okay? So if you have a source that has to be sampled, but it is also blended with other sources or actually treated that would remove the PFOA or PFAS. You can take treated water sampling also. Now you have to take the source water sampling, but you can also take treated water sampling, and the treated water sampling would be used for notification purposes. Now that notification purposes would be your consumer confidence report and your notification level compliance determination. You don't have to use the source water for those. You would use the treated water, just like you do for your consumer confidence report reporting now. If you have 3 or 4 sources, they all blend together, you use the treated water sampling in your consumer confidence report. So this would be the same thing, but you would have to take additional samples. You'd have to take not only your source samples, but treated water samples. If you want to take this option, you need to call your local district office right away, and you need to work it out with them when and how you're going to sample the treated water. It's a total option to you and something for you to think about, but if you want to do it, please call your local district office and discuss it with them, the location you're going to sample, how often, and how you're going to do that to ensure that everyone's on the same page. I'd also recommend, getting an email response to make sure everything is set up. And then you can use those treated water samples for your consumer confidence report and your notification level compliance. So the next slide, I think, talks about the results. So the laboratories are required within the order to submit all results via EDT not later than the 10th day of the following month. Now this is the order to the water system. It's not an order to the lab. So when you go to a lab and you're going to do the sampling, you have to ensure your laboratory is capable of doing this. They need to be able to send us the EDT not later than the 10th day of the following month that the lab results are completed. For consumer confidence reports, in our consumer confidence report, health and safety code, it requires that all constituents required to be sampled by the public water system are to be included in your annual consumer confidence report. So these are being required to be sampled in 2019. So in your 2019 consumer confidence report, if you get any positive results, you have to include those in your consumer confidence report. And it is water delivered to the customers. So if you take the option of the treated water sampling, you may use the treated water. But once again, please contact your district office to ensure those samples are going to be accepted. And the last slide are the notification levels. So PFOA is 14 parts per trillion. PFAS is 13 parts per trillion. And if you exceed those in a confirmed detect, so if you have a confirmed detect, Health and Safety Code Section 116455 requires the notification of a local agency, which is the city or the county, and PUC if that's applicable. So if you are a PUC regulated entity, you also need to notify the PUC of the source contamination exceeding the notification level. The notification level are required for water delivered to the public for consumption. So that is the treated water option that we talked about. And the notification level is required once. That's what the law says. Now, if a source remains in service, we have always recommended that annual notification to your local agency be completed. And the reason for that is, things change. County supervisors change, county people change, cities change, your boards change, and they change on different frequencies. And if you're going to continue to use a source that is exceeding the notification level, we highly recommend that you find a spot every year to re-notify your board what's going on so they're not caught by surprise and they know what's going on. The last point is the response level. The response level is actually the total concentration of PFOA and PFAS. So you add the two numbers together. If there exceeds 70, that is the same number that is the health advisory from EPA. Now you're getting up there into some pretty high numbers. we recommend that you remove that source from service or treat it. If you cannot, you need to call our district office if you get some numbers that are over 70. And we need to work out, how that source is going to be used and what other notifications that you should consider. Now remember, this is a notification level and response level. It's not an MCL type stuff. But if you do get over 70 for the combination of PFOA and PFAS, please contact your district office so we can discuss what action you can take. I think that's the last slide.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions come in, and maybe it makes sense to answer them now since they're specifically related to what you talked about. One of them is, will DDW provide a template for notifying the governing board, and will the CCR template be updated to include information on PFOA and PFAS detects?
Yeah, so I believe from a meeting we had that we do have information in the CCR already. Is that right, Dan?
Yeah, I don't recollect, Kurt, but we can certainly provide some information or feedback once we finish this and check on that.
Yeah, I think we have that, and we have talked about putting together some plain language that can be used. And we'll check the CCR and see what that looks like, but we will we'll get something. Now, it won't be the same as your standard tier 2 notification type of template, because you don't have to do that. I mean, we could put it in a template form like that. We'll have something posted for you.
This is Betsy. I can inform you that the CCR guidance was updated with PFOA, PFAS information at the time that the notification level was implemented.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you, Betsy.
Perfect, thanks. And then another question is, there's a source that is chlorinated in the well, and how does that affect the sampling procedures?
Usually what we tell people, if you can, is to turn the chlorinator off, pump it to waste, and sample then, if that's possible. Some setups are like that. If you can't, then you need to do just how you take your normal VOC and SOC sampling. This is, a synthetic organic, so however you normally take that, you would need to talk to your lab about getting proper bottles and collecting it that way.
Perfect, Kurt. Thank you. That's all of the questions we have at this point.
Okay.
We can move on to Betsy.
Good morning. And so I'm going to be sharing with you information about sample collection and analysis. I'm Betsy Lichty, the Chief of our Quality Assurance Section here at DDW, and we have been developing the sampling guidance to ensure that we have valid results from which both you and DDW can be making decisions on. Next slide, please. So there are actually two analytical methods that US EPA has evaluated and published that we are accepting at this time. The first is EPA Method 537 Revision 1.1, which was developed. EPA Method 537 without the revision was used for the UCMR3 monitoring. That method analyzed for 6 PFAS constituents, including PFOA and PFAS. It was revised and then kind of a reboot with the implementation of EPA Method 537.1. And as you can see, Revision 1.1 analyzes for 14 PFAS analytes, and Method 537.1 analyzes for 18 PFAS analytes. The newest method also has a difference in the minimum reporting level and the lowest concentration, LCMRL, such that it has lower detection levels for all except one of the PFAS constituents. When we published the notification level for PFOA and PFAS, we specifically identified EPA Method 537 Revision 1.1 to be used for analysis. EPA had not yet published the newer method, and at the time we adopted the notification level, the Revision 1.1 method was the primary method for drinking water matrices. However, in January, when the EPA method 537.1 had been published, we did request ELAP to begin accreditation under that method. And so in our orders, we allow the use of both methods. ELAP is now offering accreditation for EPA method 537.1. They began offering accreditation for the Revision 1.1 last summer, and we have 9 labs that are accredited for Revision 1.1. If a laboratory is moving to submitting an application for accreditation for analysis of PFAS, their application must be specifically for EPA method 537.1. We are phasing out the use of the 537 Revision 1.1. I know this is actually very confusing. The method names are so similar. But in essence, we're going to be phasing out Revision 1.1, allowing those laboratories that are accredited for it now to continue using that until they choose to make an application for the newer method, or at the time that their accreditation lapses, which is 2 years. At that time, they will be required to apply for the most recent method for PFAS. So just additionally, we know that EPA is working towards developing more refined methods to identify a larger range of PFAS constituents. And so they are working on methods both for drinking water matrices and other matrices. We anticipate an additional method to be out in late summer or fall for drinking water, and at that time we'll be evaluating it and making a decision as to whether we will be implementing the use of that method as well. But for now, if your laboratory is already accredited for Revision 1.1, they can continue using that. New accreditation requests must be for the 537.1. ELAP did ask us to let you know that they are publishing on their webpage an announcement today that they will be offering the accreditation for 537.1. And they will be emailing that out to their LYRIS list early this morning. Next slide, please. So these are some of the details specified in EPA Method 537.1. And in fact, it is the same details in both methods. It calls for a 250 milliliter sample volume using a polypropylene bottle with a screw cap, specifically not a glass bottle. This is a bottle where you do not have to overfill it. You can leave some airspace. You absolutely want to be certain that you do not flush out or remove any of the preservative that is in the bottle. Some laboratories will provide the bottles with the preservative already. You want to be aware if the laboratory you're using is asking for you to add the preservative in the field. We are asking for a field reagent blank or a field blank per each sample site, as well as ensuring that once the sample is collected that you put it in an iced container to be held at less than 10 degrees C or 50 degrees Fahrenheit for the first 48 hours, and then if you're storing it beyond 48 hours, you have to reduce that temperature. And there's a holding time of 14 days for extraction after sample collection. And extraction is the process that the laboratory uses to take a portion of the sample out for actual analysis. We are recommending that you submit the sample to the laboratory within 48 hours so that the requirement for the temperature can be met easily by the sampler. The minimum reporting level is the minimum reporting limit should be specified with the analytical results so that our field staff can begin evaluating the quality of the information being submitted. Next slide. So with the sampling guidance that we have published and that was attached to your order, we have developed this to provide recommendations for sample collection to prevent cross-contamination. So as you'll see as we go through these slides, the presence of PFAS chemicals are everywhere in our environment. They're in many products that we use. They have gone into the environment through our disposal methods, through our wastewater, through many mechanisms. And they are present on us through the products we use. So the guidance is intended to help you ensure that you are not contaminating the sample and that your sample is a true representation of the water being pumped from your well and delivered to your customers. And so that's why this is different from other samples. We are detecting, it's very present in our surroundings. We're trying to detect down to very low concentrations at the nanogram per liter or part per trillion level. That's the concentration of the notification levels. The 13 and 14 is as parts per trillion. And that's equivalent to 1 grain of salt in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And usually you hear, a part per million or a billion is equivalent to a drop of water. Well, now slice that drop of water up until it is the size of a grain of salt, and that is a part per trillion. Next slide, please. So where can you find the sampling guidance? It was attached to the orders, and the reality is that we are learning also as we're diving into the literature about how contamination can get into your sample and about how the analytical method. So we are revising the sampling guidance with new information. So we are going to recommend that I look to this website for the updated guidance. It should be posted by Friday of this week. And at that same link, you'll find the list of laboratories that are currently accredited to analyze for PFAS in drinking water. That list is for those laboratories that are accredited under 537 Revision 1.1. As soon as laboratories become accredited for 537.1, we will be specific as to those labs as well. So we'll keep that list updated. Next. So within the sampling guidance, we talk about several different types of samples. The field sample is the sample from the source. That, of course, is the required sample. Kurt talked about your optional sample of the treated water. The field reagent blank, or also just called the field blank, is a required sample because that is the sample that's going to help us identify whether there's cross-contamination at the site. A field duplicate is a second sample from your source. And the analytical methodology talks about a field duplicate and how a laboratory can use that for quality assurance. And so we are recommending it, but we are specifying that that would be at your laboratory discretion or your discretion if you review the method and decide that you choose to collect that. A trip blank is an additional sample that is intended to help identify sources of contamination of a sample through the actual shipping and handling process of the sample bottles. And the method does not mention use of a trip blank. The field reagent blank actually acts as a trip blank, and we'll show you how that happens in another slide. So we have decided to not require the trip blank. The current sampling guidance that you received with your orders and that is published online does mention trip blanks. And we are going to be revising that guidance to remove that as a requirement. Next. So the field sample collection, of course, is at a sample tap from your well discharge line. It should be at a location prior to any treatment. There was already a question of chlorination down the well, and Kurt gave advice on how to collect that sample. But there should be no other treatment prior to the sample collection. We are asking for the well to be flushed to waste at full flow for a minimum of 15 minutes. And so you should be discharging this to waste at a location that, of course, does not impact the sampling site. We don't want the well site flooded. And this is intended to bring water to the tap that is representative of your groundwater. And this follows the guidance, or rather the regulatory requirement for organic chemical monitoring. The sample tap itself should be flushed thoroughly because there are sources of contamination that exist both in the well and at the tap that are not actual aquifer. They are not conditions of the aquifer water quality, and that is through materials such as Teflon tape, which have PFAS constituents. So if you look closely at the photo, we've circled the sample tap, and you can see little rings of white. Those are Teflon tape that have been used as the fitting was screwed together to make it easier for it to screw together and to come apart. And those can be potential sources. So if you are able to find a Teflon tape-free sample site or choose to install a new tap that has no Teflon tape to ensure the quality of your information, then we would recommend that. Next. The field blank, as I said, is an additional sample intended to identify whether any of the conditions from the sampler or surroundings have jeopardized the integrity of the sample. And it consists of a use of a reagent-free water, a reagent water which is free of any constituents provided by the laboratory. And it must be collected at each sample site, stored in ice with the other samples, and transported with the other samples. The laboratory will provide the field blank sample bottle, which is empty, the reagent water, and the preservative if it's not already added to the sample bottle. And reagent water is simply a purified water provided by the laboratory for this purpose. Next. So the procedures for the collection of the field blank are included in our sampling guidance and are actually included in the analytical methodology, and so should be followed. You actually open the field blank sample bottle, pour the reagent water into the sample bottle, and seal up that sample bottle as if it was a field sample. You record it on your chain of custody and ship it back to the laboratory. So guidance that we are providing to laboratories based on the analytical method is that the analysis of the field blank is required only if a field sample contains an analyte at or above the minimum reporting level. Now, as you can see in the footnote, we're recommending analysis of the field blank at the same time as the field sample. And that is to reduce the chance of variability in the actual analysis. Because if you set it up at a different time, there may be different conditions in the laboratory, as well as it reduces the risk of exceeding the holding time for the sample. So on the second bullet, if an analyte found in the field sample is also present in the field blank at a concentration greater than 1/3 the minimum reporting level, then all samples collected with that field blank are invalid and must be recollected and reanalyzed. That is an indicator that there has been some environmental contamination or cross-contamination of the sample, and it is not representative of your source water. And so we are recommending that you not report that information to us electronically. You can and should let your district engineer know that the sample was collected and what the results were. Next slide. So the field duplicate sample. And as we indicated earlier, this is recommended but not required. It provides information about the precision associated with the sample collection, preservation, storage, and laboratory procedures. And it is 2 separate samples collected at the same time and placed under identical circumstances and treated exactly the same throughout the field and laboratory procedures. And so the field duplicate can be analyzed by the laboratory either to confirm a result or to evaluate the quality assurance of the analytical process. So that is at the lab's recommendation. Next. So we want to kind of dive deep into how to avoid this contamination of your sample. Samplers should refrain from the use of the following products at least 24 hours prior to your sampling event. And so this takes some significant planning and effort on your part and a requirement to ensure that your sampler is fully aware of the impact that they can have on the sampling. So you need to carefully pre-plan your sample collection. You can write out a procedure or a quality assurance project plan to ensure the quality of your samples, and we strongly encourage you to do that. So you want to avoid cosmetics, moisturizers, sunblocks, fragrances, creams, and other personal care products. And that, you know, in our environment and with our, you know, social practices, that takes some significant thought. You should avoid prepackaged foods that and also fast food, which often the wrappers for fast foods are coated with a compound to prevent oil from, you know, soaking through the paper product, and that is a PFAS chemical. And some aluminum foils can also be coated. You should not wear new or unwashed clothing, again, because there are many PFAS compounds that are in water repellent or water resistant clothing that can come off during the sample collection. Clothing washed with fabric softeners or dried with anti-static sheets should be avoided. So again, this pre-planning, the sampler should specifically wash their clothing that they plan to use during sample collection prior to sampling without using anti-static sheets. Next. Other items to avoid. Teflon or other fluoropolymer containing materials. Again, we mentioned the use of Teflon tape at the sample taps. Don't use any waterproof or treated paper on your field notebooks. And of course, we do recommend you take notes during your sample collection, documenting the site conditions, the weather, anything specific about the sample site, because that becomes documentation as if you do have a detection and you're trying to really ascertain whether that was your source or something from the site, those notes are going to help. We recommend not using waterproof or permanent markers, adhesive paper products such as Post-it notes or Scotch tape, and those products should be avoided, you know, in the full 24 hours prior to sample collection. Water-resistant clothing such as Gore-Tex, the use of glass bottles. Avoid sampling during the rain, and as always, you shouldn't eat, drink, or smoke during your sampling activity. Next. So before sampling, again, pre-planning, development of a quality assurance project plan or some type of sampling guidance for your sampler. Be familiar with each sample site. Coordinate the sampling event with your laboratory. Ensure you have the correct number of bottles for the number of sites that the order requires you to sample. Ensure that you have the field reagent blank and the field reagent sample bottle. Make sure that you've confirmed with your laboratory whether the bottles have been pre-treated with the preservative or whether they are asking you to add the preservative to the sample bottle. Verify the site ID and the set of sample bottles to be used. Ensure that you have an ice chest that has a clean interior. Ensure an adequate number of sealable bags are available to store all the sample bottles in. And so we want those sample bottles to be placed in a sealed bag before they're placed into the ice chest so they're not in direct contact with the ice or the cold water. Next. So some other recommendations is and these are based on the analytical methodology, that you wash your hands before sampling with Alkanox or Liquinox soap and rinse with deionized water. You should wear nitrile gloves, and we would recommend you have enough gloves on hand for each of your sample sites. You want to change your gloves between sample sites. Check that the label ID on the sample container matches the chain of custody. So you're filling the chain of custody out as you're sampling. You can pre-label your sample bottles so that you're prepared at the point you go out in the field. But make sure that you use the right sample bottle at each site. Next. Sample shipping, again, this is specified within the sampling guidance and talks about how you should be storing the bottles in the ice chest, fully packed with ice. Recommendations, or actually requirements for the shipping temperature and for both you and for the laboratory. And a recommendation that the extraction has to be done within 14 days of sample collection. Next. So remember, final word of caution, your data is only as good as your sampling techniques, and ensure that you're using an accredited lab, and you can find those at our website. Get updated PFAS sampling guidance also at our website. Results should be reported to us electronically, and make sure that you receive the hard copy results with all of the quality control, quality assurance information, because we may be asking that you share those with us as we can better understand the results of the information. So next slide. That's all that I have to share. The sampling guidance goes into much greater detail, and we can be reached either by phone or email with questions from you or the lab. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. This is Dan. And so we have contact information as noted here for Betsy and Mariella, who developed the guidance. And then one last slide. I wanted to note that we have, as Betsy mentioned, we have links, but we also have other resources available. The results of these source wells will be posted on GeoTracker's Gamma site once we get the data in and collected. So with that, I'll leave this slide open, and Cassie, I'll turn it over to you, and Kurt and Betsy and I can take questions.
Perfect. Yes, thank you all for sharing that information with us. We do have a bunch of questions, so I'll kind of categorize them based on the type of question it is. We'll start off with questions related to sampling and detections regarding the information that you presented, Betsy. One of them is, do hits for other PFAS compounds require notifications?
And of course, yes, Dan or Kurt could respond, but the answer is I don't believe so. Maybe Kurt or Dan, if you want to respond. They do not have notification levels, and so they do not follow the notification level process. But there would be a requirement to report them on the CCR. But Dan, if you have a different response.
No, that's correct, Betsy. Any detects have to go in your CCR, but notification to your governing body is only for exceedances of a notification level, and at this time we only have 2, which I listed.
Perfect. Next question. In the case of PFAS detections, do subsequent confirmation samples need to be taken and analyzed before the end of the calendar quarter in which the original sample was taken? Kurt?
Yeah, you have 30 days, so I know what you're getting at. If you take, your samples in the middle of the quarter and you don't get your lab samples back for, 20 or 30 days, and you have 30 days and you miss it, I think if that's going to happen to you, please contact your district office. But if you can meet that 30 days from when you if you can meet what's in the order, if it spills into the next quarter, we'll use that.
Okay. Next question regarding notification levels. Well, actually, it's a question on standby sources. If a standby source is only activated to sample but not delivered to customers, is public notification required if there is a detection?
Yeah, so the notification level requirement is a confirmed detect delivered by a public water system. So if the water that you sampled is not delivered, for whatever reason you're not using the well within your system, but you've turned it on, you've flushed it out, you've taken a sample because you got the order, the notification level requirements would not kick in. Neither would the consumer confidence reports. But, if you do have positives in that well, you do need to somehow inform your management, obviously, and we would obviously get informed as well when the data comes in. So it's something to think about, but the actual notification level requirements in the Health and Safety Code don't kick in unless it is delivered to the customer.
Okay, perfect. And kind of along those lines of sample collection, there's a question about sampling active approved sources, and you mentioned the 15-minute runtime. That runtime can be into the system just 15 minutes prior to sample collection. It does not have to be flushed to waste.
No, it doesn't have to be flushed to waste. We just want you to sample a well that's being used. So if you have a regularly used well and it's being pumped, here and there all day, we just want to make sure you sample it when it's on and it's been running for hopefully 15 minutes so you get a good sample from the groundwater. Similar to how you do your other organic sampling and other sampling.
Okay. Another question is, the field sample is non-detect, but there is a detection in the field duplicate.
There's likely the field duplicate would not be analyzed unless the field sample had a detection. That is one of the quality assurance steps within the method, and so it is not analyzed unless the field sample is. However, it is a relevant sample from the source if the lab sets them up simultaneously, and in essence, they're blind samples. A detection in either one is a detection.
Okay.
So again, we simply encourage the laboratories to follow the methodology, and once the results are available, they can reach out to their district engineer to request guidance.
All right, perfect. And along those same lines regarding the field duplicate, what are the reasons a lab would or would not recommend collecting a field duplicate sample?
Again, specified in the analytical methodology, it has to do with quality assurance. There is the ability for the laboratory, instead of use of a field duplicate, they can use a matrix spike for some of the quality control processes. So again, it's based on the laboratory's SOP as to what they are going to be using for their quality evaluations.
Okay, and another question is in regard to the use of synthetic ice or gel ice. Is that acceptable during sampling events?
No, and we never recommend the use of those types of ice for transporting samples. Should always be frozen water ice.
All right. If cosmetics, sunblocks, fast food wrappers, aluminum foil, etc., are safe for consumers to use, which presume to have higher concentrations of PFAS, then why the NL and RL so low in drinking water? That's a loaded question.
That is, and I'm going to leave that to Kurt or Dan to respond.
Yeah, and I would note that there's an assumption in there. DTSC, the Safer Consumer Products folks, are working very hard to make that determination, and I'll just leave it at that.
Sure. Okay, next, what % of samples come back as contaminated on average? Do we have a feel for environmental impacts on sample results?
And I'm presuming the question is contaminated from field cross-contamination?
Right.
Yes, we simply do not have that type of information. However, we know that the products are so prevalent in the environment, which is why we're conducting the sampling, as well as in our personal routines, that there is a high likelihood of cross-contamination. And because of the consequences of the results, we want water systems to have the most reliable information when they're sampling.
Okay, and I expect that if you have lab personnel that are going to be doing the sample collection and handling the samples, are they required to follow the same protocol?
Yes.
Okay. And then just in regard to that, we have a comment about, restricting employees' behavior. Any thoughts on how you address that if you're in a utility that's asking employees to sample? Is it just through your quality assurance plan for this sampling event, or how do you expect that utilities would require their employees to follow this protocol?
Well, it comes down to the requirements that the utility places on their sampling. If they're not 100% certain that their sampler will follow those protocols, then they simply should not be collecting the samples for them. In the end, when a water system has samples collected, submitted to a laboratory, analyzed and reported to us, they are responsible for those results. They are accepted by us, and they are deemed to be valid results. So the sample preparation, or rather the preparation prior to sampling, is very important because there are some consequences to those results. And if they are false positives and based on the sampling protocols, then that means a higher cost to the utility to prove otherwise through collection of confirmation samples, or they simply are, if it exceeds the notification level, and then they're in the process of notification. So it simply is, each utility gets to decide how serious they want to get about the sampling. And we provided sampling guidance to guide them in that. And we will be interested to hear, any the results of sampling and whether, utilities have followed the protocol and have been able to get what they consider good quality representative samples.
Okay, thank you, Betsy. There's another question regarding the sampling guides. There are 2 sampling guides found on the DDW PFAS website. Is the general sampling guide to be followed as well?
DDWP.
PFAS website.
Oh, our PFAS web. There's 2 sampling guidances there?
That's
There-
what
there-
the... Go ahead.
There is a general guidance that DWQ published. I would encourage that much of that is in line and the same as what Betsy's presenting here. But I would encourage on the drinking water site to use the drinking water tab on the PFAS website. That's much more drinking water oriented. Keep in mind that DWQ is doing the same thing in sampling groundwater at these sites. The 3 criteria that I mentioned, and their sampling criteria and their methodology might be a little different. And they will clarify that on the website as they move forward.
That's correct. And you want to remember that they are sampling other matrices in the sampling that they're requiring under the orders that they have issued. So our Division of Water Quality has issued orders to the sites such as landfills and airports to do monitoring, and it goes beyond drinking water. So for clarification, the analytical methodology that we are requiring, the EPA Method 537.1 or Revision 1.1, is specifically for drinking water matrices. It is not for other matrices such as soil or non-drinking water, just groundwater. They are specifying other analytical methods. And the sensitivity of the methods for drinking water and the low level of detection really gives us, I think, a greater level of caution in our sample collection procedures. And so you'll notice if you do look at the Division of Water Quality Sampling guidance, they actually list a set of sunblocks that are acceptable. I was not able to confirm where that list was derived from to verify that they are in fact PFAS free, and so we did not list those as acceptable products. Just being cautious. If we cannot confirm it, then we're not going to publish that. So on your own, if you can confirm a product is safe and free of PFAS, and you would like to share that with Mariella and I, we would certainly accept the information you have and confirm that and give you guidance on it.
And I'll add real quickly that's a great question. It shows that that we need to be more clear on our website. So we'll certainly address that and make sure that it's identified that it's drinking water matrix versus others. Thank you for that comment.
And to add to that, the link in my slides is specifically to the Division of Drinking Water website that will take you direct to our drinking water sampling guidance. It's middle of the page under analytical methods.
Perfect. And any idea what a single sampling event will cost, an analysis for PFOA and PFAS costs a utility?
Well, Dan, go ahead.
Okay. We did some looking into that, and we're seeing costs range depending on the number of blanks. And I suspect this will fine-tune a little more, especially as we get more labs accredited. But around $1,000 per source well, per sampling event is what the rough number. We've seen numbers lower, and I've heard from one lab a number higher. But I think that's a good budget number for now.
Okay, there's a question about the staging area. Can you give a definition of the staging area distance from the sample point?
I don't recall discussing a staging area in my slides.
Okay, so maybe if you can ask a follow-up question and give us more details on what you're asking regarding the staging area, we can come back to that one. There's also a question about the use of Sharpie. So since we cannot use a Sharpie, what is the recommended way to label the bottles? I think common practice is to use a Sharpie.
Yes, we were supposed to track that down. And I don't recall if we did. I know historically there were wax pencils, but I will follow up on that, and we will update that in our sampling guidance so we have some type of guidance for utilities.
Okay.
And Cassie, I'm going to take this opportunity to just share that we, as a division, know that this is a unique approach. There's a lot of momentum politically behind this PFAS concern. And so what we're doing is, I'll emphasize, this is an investigatory effort. We're trying to collect data and see just what the scope of this is so that we can make some informed decisions as the federal EPA and others move forward. So it's a unique situation, we understand, and we'll be updating guidance and doing what we can on the website. And I would encourage a frequent visiting to our websites, as Betsy mentioned, as we find more information and share it.
Okay, and can you maybe elaborate? There's a question about whether or not these sampling guidances that were the sampling guidance that was created was in place when they did the UCMR 3 sampling. So maybe you can elaborate on how that sampling differs from the sampling we're asking utilities to do.
Well, and I can respond to the sampling guidance. I highly doubt US EPA provided a unique sampling guidance specifically for the PFAS versus the other samples that were collected. Of course, under UCMR 3, there is a whole range of analytes that utilities were required to sample for. And I do know, though, that some of the sites that were positive at high concentrations, the utilities did confirm sample the results and worked with us to remove some of those from service. Our sampling guidance created now is based on greater knowledge that we have about the prevalence of PFAS in our environment and on us. And so we are wanting to refine beyond the UCMR 3 results to ensure that what we're finding is representative of the groundwater.
I'll also add that they used higher minimum reporting limits. I believe it was 20 and 40 parts per trillion. We know now, since that time, that these levels are at much lower our concern. So we're going much lower. I'll just add that the UCMR 3 effort had higher levels.
All right, so let's transition over to some treatment questions. We'll keep typing in your questions. We have plenty of time remaining, but let's talk about treatment. Can someone elaborate on the BAT for treatment of PFAS and whether or not filtration at a wellhead counts as treatment?
General filtration won't remove PFOA or PFAS or any of the PFASs. The BATs right now are listed, or just generally, are granular activated carbon, so some kind of carbon to basically grab onto it, or reverse osmosis will filter it out. We'll basically take it out. Other than that, go ahead.
Yeah, Kurt, I can dive in a little bit. So the PFAS and PFOA are what are considered long chains, and the GAC and ion exchange are fairly effective on those long chains. What we're seeing a concern with is the shorter chains, and that's why we're asking for all analytes to be reported in a methodology, all 18 analytes. The shorter chains, GAC and ion exchange, are not as effective. And as Kurt mentioned, that's a more sophisticated treatment technology to remove the short chains. That's why this is more of an investigative approach, is to see what's out there and what we're dealing with and the impact.
Perfect. And then kind of going along with that, Dan, in regard to how the sources were selected, there's a question about whether or not all landfills and airports that are near systems receiving orders, have they been verified as having the contamination in their groundwater?
Not yet. This is a two-pronged parallel approach. For instance, the airports were licensed to use AFFF and known to use firefighting activities. So in the essence of time, DWQ just sent out their orders to the airports and to the landfills to incorporate monitoring into their work plans. And so they are moving forward, and it's a tremendous effort for some of these airports. Landfills typically have monitoring wells, and they can incorporate. But we're moving forward in parallel. So we will probably see airports that don't have a detect, and we'll be getting wells that don't have a detect, or vice versa. So it's a parallel effort, and they're currently, DWQ is currently working on that sampling effort.
Okay, and then in terms of future rounds of monitoring, if PFOA and PFAS is detected, will DDW extend the sampling radius of the detected source to try to determine the extent?
That is a possibility in phases 2 and 3, and that's why I'm calling those draft. We're trying to get a feel for what's out there, and if we see some hot spots and we have a lot of detects in wells, we might reach out a little further in future phases. That is certainly an option.
Okay, and I know Betsy mentioned the sampling guide specifically for groundwater. Is there any proposal to do PFAS monitoring of surface water sources?
Yeah, that's, I believe, in phase 3. And again, something we're considering. Wastewater treatment plants discharging to water bodies would certainly contribute to PFAS. And so we will likely be testing surface water sources in a future phase. How that looks is still up in the air.
Okay, and there's a question regarding financial assistance, especially for the small systems that received these orders. Any available financial assistance?
No, there's not, unfortunately. We know that this is a little pricey, but it's also, in our opinion, within a range of a system that should be prepared to address concerns. And so, moving forward, if there is a system that's absolutely strapped, please let your DE know. But we don't see this as a cost prohibitive measure at this point.
Okay. Next, kind of going back to notifications of governing bodies. When and how will DDW release recommended simple, plain language regarding PFOA, PFAS, human health effects that is required for governing body notifications?
Kurt, didn't we write something up on that?
Yeah, we've actually kicked around some language already, and like Betsy said, we do have some language in the Consumer Confidence Report. We will post something on our website in the next couple weeks.
I think at a current point, we'll go deeper on that, but I believe we have some general language now on the website, but we'll certainly expand upon that.
Yeah, we'll put something together.
And Dan, can you elaborate on the phased approach? The question is, should utilities expect to receive 2 more monitoring orders for phases 2 and 3 in 2019? Will we get additional notices even if no wells are identified under phases 2 and 3 criteria?
There is a potential that a water system may have wells adjacent to its manufacturing sites if we locate them. And so if they did receive orders now, or they received an order now, there may be future phases coming. I really think this phase 1 is going to shed a lot of light on just how we approach future phases. But then again, the State Water Board has a lot of input on what we do and how we move forward. So we'll make some recommendations. I do believe we're going to reapproach the board with the results of phase 1 before we move to phase 2 and 3, and there will be an opportunity for discussion at that point. But we're really anxious to see what we get with this phase 1, and that will dictate, hopefully, a logical path forward. And that's why we're doing this targeted focus. Something, like I said, that's kind of new. We're not just doing a blanket order out there. We're really trying to focus down, save time and money, and approach this in a logical fashion.
Okay, and then back to environmental influences regarding Teflon tape. What if all sample taps contain Teflon tape? It's very common to use on all plumbing threads to have a tight seal. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'd recommend that they make sure that tap is flushed very well and make a notation in your notebook as to the presence of that. If the sample comes back positive, then you may want to consider, doing some investigation as to whether the source could be the tap.
Okay, thank you, Betsy. And then another sampling procedure question. Can we sample the well first, then if PFAS is detected, sample the treated water? Or does the sampling need to be taken on the same day to avoid notification?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's why I really highly recommend that you call your district office first. And just if you're running the same blending operation or the same treatment operation, for the next, 6 months or whatever, you could probably do them at different times, and your district office could, recommend that if things kind of jump around in your treatment, if you have multiple wells and some of them are running and some of them aren't type of thing, you really need to discuss your particular situation. Obviously, the best is doing them at the same time. But I do know that that's a high cost. So, please call your district office and discuss your situation with them and figure out what you're going to do.
Yes, and Kurt, can you go over one more time the requirements for if you exceed the notification level versus if you exceed the response level? We're getting a lot of questions on that.
So If you exceed the notification level of 13 or 14, you have to, within 30 days, notify your governing body, which is your city or county that you're in, and also the PUC if you're a PUC regulated entity. So that would be at a meeting. You know, you go to a city council meeting or you go to the county board of supervisors meeting, and you know, you get that on the agenda and you basically notify them of what occurred. If you have a response level exceedance, you still have to do the same because you obviously are higher than the notification level also. So you have to do the notification level exceedance. But the response level is a higher level that is, you know, more a health risk type level. And we recommend that, you know, you eliminate the use of the source if possible. And if you can't, we do recommend under certain circumstances that, you know, maybe you even do some public notification of what's going on. So that's something you need to work out with your district offices if you have a response level exceedance. But both of them, you know, the same notification level the same notification requirements are for both. It's just the response level you really need to call, and we need to talk about your options.
Kurt, that is just for PFAS and PFOA. The remaining analytes that are submitted, we don't have notification levels for, correct?
That's right. So if those are positive, like you said, we don't have any numbers for them. If some of them are extremely high, you know, if they're like, you know, over 50 or 100, it would be something to call us about, and we're going to be watching for those and possibly developing additional notification levels based upon, you know, what kind of data we get.
And then what happens if a source exceeds the response level in the first quarter but below the response level in the following quarters?
If you have to use the well, you're obviously using the well if you're asking that. If you have to use the well, you have to use the well. So you need to just talk to our district office about it, and we'll figure something out.
Okay, and you mentioned having to go before the governing body. Does that mean just a simple notification letter to the governing body is insufficient? If you receive the level?
I think you just have to notify them. So if they, you know, if you send them a letter and, you know, they just have to be notified. So there's some specific language in the order, but.
Okay. And then, is anyone aware that's on the line familiar with something that you can use for sealing up the pipes and getting that type seal other than Teflon tape? That's something maybe we have to research, but that question came in.
Yeah, and I suspect even the pastes are the same situation. That's a good question. I was thinking the same thing as I was listening, but we'll have to do more research.
Okay, so I think that takes us to the end of our questions. It's not too late. If you have that burning question you haven't had an opportunity to ask yet, please feel free to type that in. Just as a reminder, we would like to let you know that all of this information, including the PowerPoint, the updated sampling guide, and the recording from today's training will be posted on the division's PFAS website. So continue to check that location for updated information. I'll send out a link to where that stuff is posted once we have it posted on the internet for public access, and that should be later this week sometime. And keep, as Kurt mentioned, if you have questions that come up, feel free to coordinate with your district offices. Betsy mentioned we're learning new things, so definitely do not be shy about asking your questions, and we'll get them incorporated into our frequently asked questions and our resources that we're putting out there to help the utilities be successful and the division be successful in getting this information from all of you. So we don't have any other questions. I would just like to Oh, we do have one other question, just in time. Must a public water system request all method analytes from the lab and not solely PFOA and PFAS? So maybe, Betsy, you can go over that.
Yes, we are requiring that the full analysis be reported to DDW, primarily because we need, although we have notification levels for PFOA and PFAS, the other perfluorinated compounds that can be detected, of course, 14 in the revision 1.1, 18 in 537.1, are also of health concern, and we need to be knowledgeable and aware of their presence in drinking water so we can make decisions moving forward. And so it is required that under the order that the entire suite of analytes under each method be reported to us. And we're actually working with laboratories to ensure that they understand that accreditation has to be for the full suite of constituents in each method.
Okay, and there's a question, Kurt, going back to your comments on slide 14 about invalidating a positive sample, based on repeat samples that come back as non-detect. How do the district offices mark those as false positives? Do you have any thoughts on that, or you'll provide guidance on that?
Yeah, you have to contact DMU and send them an email. It's Robert at DMU. You send him an email, and with the 3 samples that were collected, and that the sample that is positive you want to be marked as a false positive, and then he marks it in the database.
And I would suggest that that should be done through the district office, so the district staff are working with our data management unit to make that notation.
Right. I think Robert only takes emails from our DEs.
Yeah.
Okay, and there's another question about the notification clock. When does the notification clock start if a system only wants to confirm some source PFAS detections with the initial result or the confirmed result?
So it says in the law that within 30 days after you are first informed of a confirmed detection. So that means if you take your first sample and you're not going to take another one, as soon as you know that first sample is over the NL, you have 30 days. If you take a second sample to confirm it, when you get that second result back, you have 30 days from that time.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I think you addressed that question in terms of paying for confirmation samples and when notification is required. So that takes us to the end of our questions. Again, just thank you for joining us today. Special thanks to Dan, Kurt, and Betsy for joining us and providing the training today. Thank you for your cooperation on this. We're learning as we go, and we appreciate your feedback. As a reminder, the recorded version of today's training will be available along with the handouts and other supplemental meeting materials later this week. And if you have any other questions, again, use your district offices as a resource, and we will get you the answers that you need. If there are no further questions, we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Cassie. Great job.
Thank you.